reality. Sometimes when I bring up this anti-goal, anti-visualization stuff, people bring up something called the Yale study of goals, which you may have heard of. If you ever read any of these books that tells you you've got to set very clear, specific goals in order to win at life, they mention the Yale study of goals. The story is that in 1953, researchers asked the graduating students at Yale University how many of them had specific written down goals for the rest of their lives. And only 3% of them said that they did. And then 20 years later, the same researchers caught up with the same students and found that the 3% who had written down specific goals had amassed more financial wealth than the other 97% combined. And this finding is everywhere. It is in a very large number of books. Turns out there's a small methodological flaw with it, which is that it's completely made up. And if you ring the archivists at Yale University, as I did, first of all they sigh down the phone because they've been asked this question before, but then they go and double, triple check, and that no, it still doesn't exist, and it also doesn't exist at Harvard Business School in 1975, which is the other reference that sometimes crops up. This key dogma of goal setting, this key document that fuels the dogma of goal setting appears to just be a figment of people's imagination. But I do want to accept that these things like affirmations and visualization are sort of an easy target. They're easy to mock, and that's why I enjoy doing so. But I think it's important. I think what I want to suggest is that we're all of us caught to some degree in this trap that one of the philosophers I write about calls the cult of optimism. Even if we wouldn't give any time to phrases in front of the mirror, or goal visualization, or walking barefoot across hot coals using the power of positive thinking like they do at Anthony Robbins' seminars, we still on some level think that happiness can only mean stamping out the negative. It can only mean asserting positive emotions, trying to guarantee positive outcomes. And the alternative perspective on this is very nicely summed up in a quote that is attributed to Edith Wharton. If only we'd stop trying so hard to be happy, we could have a pretty good time. I'm very glad, by the way, that I discovered a couple of weeks before the book went to the printer rather than after that she didn't say it at all. It's just a bunch of people on the internet who think that she did. So in the remainder of what I have to say, I'll just sketch out 3 of the stopping points, I suppose, that I made on this negative path to give you a sense of what I'm talking about. It turns out that this relentless focus on positive thinking is actually a very, very recent historical phenomenon. It goes back maybe a century and a half. Last year was the 60th anniversary of the publication of The Power of Positive Thinking by Norman Vincent Peale. It didn't start the whole thing, but it was there fairly near the beginning. If you go a lot further back into the various philosophical and spiritual traditions, you find a very different attitude towards negativity. So first of all, I discovered that there's a whole underground community of modern-day people who call themselves Stoics. Not in the sense that we use that term in Britain, certainly today, which means pretending that nothing bad is happening and repressing your emotions, but rather drawing on the Stoics of ancient Greece and Rome, who had a much more accommodating attitude towards negativity and how to deal with negative emotions. It's a very big philosophy. I'm not going to try and summarize it tonight, but one of the techniques they advocated that I really like is what they call the premeditation of evils. You could think of it as negative visualization. Instead of focusing on the best case scenario, they say, sometimes it really pays to focus on how badly things could turn out. In modern psychology, it's called defensive pessimism, and the estimates are that about a third of us use it naturally. It comes naturally as a coping mechanism instead of optimism. See, we usually respond to anxiety or worry in ourselves or our kids or friends, whoever it is, with reassurance. So if somebody thinks everything is going to go catastrophically wrong, you want to try and persuade them that everything is going to work out well. But when you do that, you implicitly reinforce this other idea, which is that it would be absolutely terrible if they didn't turn out well. The Stoics say, you should deliberately do the opposite. Think through in calm and sober detail how badly things could actually go. You'll almost always conclude that they were less bad than you had been dimly thinking. You'll be able to marshal your resources for coping with them if they do occur. As Seneca points out, it will also have another advantage, which is that it will make you appreciate all the things that you do currently enjoy if you regularly remind yourself that you could lose them. We read all the time now, I think, about psychology studies saying that gratitude is the secret to happiness, which is great. But if you're, if you're a bit of a grouch like me, it's hard to remember and to find ways to be grateful on a daily basis. Well, Seneca points out a really easy way that actually is in tune with a more pessimistic outlook on the world is to look at all the relationships and possessions that you enjoy and to remind yourself that you might not have them forever. In fact, in an ultimate sense, you definitely won't have them forever. You'll appreciate them all the more, you'll feel gratitude, and you'll be happy in a way that you could never have approached if all you'd been doing was trying to convince yourself that they'd be around forever and ever. Seneca says you should look at your closest relationships not as one of those things that cannot be taken away, but as though it were a jar or a crystal goblet. In other words, fragile and something you should cherish. You could even take this to the next level and deliberately bring about the worst-case scenario that you were worried about. Albert Ellis, the psychologist who was very heavily influenced by Stoicism and who he died a few years ago, but I interviewed him for this book, and he used to say that if you're really scared of embarrassing yourself, you should embarrass yourself deliberately. So I did this because I am very scared of embarrassing myself, or at least I was before I did this exercise. He used to say you should do this on the New York subway. I ended up doing it on the London Underground. His advice was you should travel on the Underground, I'll say, and just speak out loud the names of each station as you approach them, so that everybody can hear. So it's terrifying to think about doing this. I mean, it's really a scary thought. But what's interesting about it is that it's not clear why it should be so scary. I mean, you're not proposing to harass anyone or attack anyone or verbally abuse anyone. You're sort of helping them, actually, right? I mean, you're telling them the name of the next station. But it is really terrifying to think about. And so the interesting thing about doing it is, well, actually it's pretty terrifying to do as well. But what's interesting is what doesn't happen. As soon as you do this, you realize you're not going to get arrested. You're not going to get attacked. The consequences that you experience don't remotely begin to justify the level of worry that you had going in. What happens is that a couple of people look up from their newspaper briefly, and then look down again, thereby illustrating one of the fundamental findings of social psychology, which is that most people, most of the time, are thinking about themselves and not you. So you really don't need to be so self-conscious. Anyway, in this direct encounter between your beliefs about the consequences of embarrassment and the real consequences, your fears are cut down to size. You don't convince yourself that it's fun. I don't go around doing it as a matter of course. But the anxiety disperses, and actually for a few hours afterwards I felt great.